The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, but it couldn't warm the chill between them. Sarah stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal with one hand while her other gripped the edge of the counter like it might hold her upright. Behind her, David sat slouched at the kitchen table, his breath heavy, his eyes tired. A half-eaten donut sat beside his coffee cup, black, 3 sugars. Same routine, same silence. She glanced at him. He looked older than 38. Not just in his face, but in the way he carried his body, as if the world pressed down on him every time he stood. His once toned frame was now bloated and sluggish, the product of too many processed meals and too many nights staring blankly at the television. But what broke her heart wasn't his weight, or his lab results she had secretly read on the kitchen counter last week: hypertension, borderline diabetic, dangerously high cholesterol. What broke her heart was the look in his eyes. That quiet giving up, like he'd already decided he didn't deserve better. She placed the bowl in front of him gently. Steel-cut oats. I added cinnamon and apples. He poked at it with his spoon. You hate this stuff, he muttered. I love you, she said softly, her voice catching. That made him pause. She sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly. David, I saw the doctor's note. I know. His shoulders slumped, like he'd been waiting for this confrontation but praying it wouldn't come. I don't want to lecture you. I don't want to fight, she said. I want my husband back. The man who used to dance with me in the kitchen. The man who built our bed frame with his own hands and surprised me with smoothies every Saturday. He looked at her for the first time that morning. Really looked. And in his eyes, something flickered. Not defensiveness. Not guilt. Grief. I don't know how to be him anymore, he whispered. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Then let me remind you, she said. One step at a time. David Michaels hadn't always been this way. In fact, just 5 years ago, he'd been the kind of man who bounced out of bed before sunrise to jog around the neighborhood, waving at the mailman and singing out loud to Bruce Springsteen. He loved life, and more than anything, he loved Sarah. They'd met the way romantic stories rarely do anymore, at a busted-up community center in Dayton, Ohio, where Sarah was volunteering at a blood drive and David had walked in to donate. She made a joke about him passing out in line, and he'd laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. That was 12 years ago. They married young, Sarah, a practical nursing student who believed in hard work and gentle hearts. David, a dreamer who sketched blueprints on napkins and talked about building homes that felt like love. They bought their first house by the time they were 30, a small fixer-upper with chipped tiles and creaky floors, but they made it beautiful. David did most of the repairs himself, often surprising Sarah with painted walls and handmade bookshelves. He was always full of energy, full of life. Then came 2020. The pandemic hit like a slow avalanche. David's design firm downsized, and he lost his job. At first, he threw himself into freelancing, convinced it was just a phase. But the months dragged on, and the rejections piled up. Sarah picked up more shifts at the hospital, working nights and weekends. She barely had time to breathe, and David, he stopped trying. The spark in his sketches dimmed, and soon, the pencils were left untouched in a drawer. The man who once packed healthy lunches for both of them now ordered takeout almost every night. The one who used to prep green smoothies started sleeping until noon and drinking soda like it was water. Sarah noticed it all, but she was too exhausted to push. At the hospital, she was holding hands with dying patients, calling families who weren't allowed in. She watched life slip through fingers that had done everything right. So when she came home to David asleep on the couch again, the pizza box open, she told herself, one thing at a time. But the thing about apathy is that it spreads. David stopped going outside. He stopped returning calls from friends. He even stopped hugging her like he meant it. One night, she came home and found him in the dark, the glow of the television casting shadows across his face. His eyes were glazed over, empty. The same man who once took her to the top of a snowy hill just to propose under falling stars now sat like a ghost in their living room. Babe, she whispered gently that night, touching his shoulder. Do you want to go for a walk? Maybe tomorrow, he said, not even looking at her. But tomorrow never came. Then the bloodwork came in. She hadn't meant to snoop, but he left the envelope from Dr. Hendricks on the kitchen table, opened but ignored. She read it in silence, twice. His numbers were bad. Not just, lose a few pounds, bad. Dangerous. Still, David said nothing. Did nothing. Sarah lay awake that night, listening to his snoring, heavy, interrupted, labored. She stared at the ceiling and fought back tears. She'd watched patients die from the same path he was walking. And she couldn't save them. But she could try to save him. What broke her heart most wasn't the health news. It was that he had stopped believing he was worth fighting for. David had always been there for her. When she lost her dad, it was David who held her through the night. When she failed her first nursing exam, it was David who taped a handwritten note to the bathroom mirror, "You're going to change lives, Sarah. Don't give up." And now, he was the one fading. But Sarah had made a vow. Not just the one on their wedding day, but the silent one she made every morning she saw him slipping. "I'll love you through this. Even when you don't love yourself." The day she decided to change everything didn't look like a big day. It was a rainy Saturday. The kind of gray sky that makes you want to stay in bed and forget the world exists. David had barely moved from the couch all morning. His phone buzzed once, then twice, probably old coworkers or his mom, but he didn't even glance at it. Sarah came in from the grocery store soaked through her scrubs and sweater. She shook off the rain like a weary dog, dropped the bags on the counter, and looked over at her husband. His feet were propped on the coffee table. A sugary cereal bowl sat empty beside a can of soda. Something in her chest cracked. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just took a deep breath, pulled out the blender from the cabinet, and began peeling oranges. David glanced up, brows furrowed. "What are you doing?" "Making us smoothies," she said simply. "I'm good," he muttered, eyes drifting back to the screen. Sarah didn't answer. She just added kale, a banana, ginger, and yogurt. The blender roared to life, drowning out the news anchor's droning voice. David sighed. A minute later, she walked over and handed him a tall glass. "Try it," she said softly. He took it reluctantly. "Looks like pond water." She sat beside him. "It's got your favorites. And ginger. For inflammation." "I'm not some project you can fix, Sarah." "I'm not trying to fix you," she replied. "I'm trying to fight for you." His eyes snapped to hers. "I saw the labs," she continued, her voice cracking. "I know you didn't want me to. And I get it, you're tired, and scared, and maybe you feel like this is just who you are now. But I remember who you were. And I believe he's still in there." David looked down at the smoothie. His hands trembled slightly. "What if I try, and still fail?" She reached over and took his hand in both of hers. "Then we fail together. But I will not stand by and watch you fade." For the first time in months, David drank the whole glass. That night, Sarah didn't make a big deal about it. She didn't turn it into a lecture or a victory dance. She just smiled, kissed his forehead, and left a handwritten note on the fridge the next morning. "Greater than, day 1. Proud of you." What came after wasn't easy. They started with walks. Just around the block. David complained the whole way. His knees hurt, his feet ached, but he walked. Sarah held his hand, cracking jokes and pointing out silly lawn gnomes like they were rare wildlife. The walks became jogs. The jogs became short hikes. Then she started cooking. Not the bland, diet food David feared, but meals that made healthy taste like comfort. Grilled salmon with lemon and herbs. Roasted vegetables with sweet garlic. Even homemade veggie pizza with a cauliflower crust he grudgingly admitted, wasn't terrible. She didn't push. She invited. She didn't shame. She cheered. And slowly, David responded. One afternoon, he came out of the spare room holding a sketchpad. "I had this idea for a community garden at the old library downtown," he said, eyes gleaming. Sarah felt tears rise. Not from the drawing, but from the life she saw flickering back into his face. That night, he left her a note on the bathroom mirror. Greater than, day 20. Thanks for not giving up on me. They began calling it the notes wall, a small bulletin board in the kitchen where they'd pin encouragements, goals, tiny triumphs. When David's blood pressure dropped for the first time in 6 months, Sarah made him a medal out of tinfoil. When he made his own healthy lunch without being reminded, he stuck a gold star next to it. None of it cost much. But all of it meant everything. Sarah's act of kindness wasn't a grand gesture. It was the quiet, determined belief that someone could still rise, even when they'd stopped believing it themselves. It was love in motion. Love that didn't yell or demand. Love that walked beside him. The transformation wasn't fast. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. 3 months in, David had lost 15 pounds. His doctor's tone during their follow-up was cautiously hopeful. Still a long way to go, drive. Hendricks had said, flipping through the chart, but this is progress, David. Real progress. David nodded, but it wasn't the number on the scale that meant the most to him. It was the way Sarah squeezed his hand during the appointment, her eyes shining with pride. He hadn't seen that look from her in years. Not just pride in him. Joy. At home, the changes took on a rhythm of their own. They made Sunday mornings sacred again, prepping meals together, blending smoothies, and writing out grocery lists like teammates. Sarah even bought 2 pairs of bright orange walking shoes and labeled them, his and hers. David chuckled when he saw them. We look like traffic cones. Sarah smirked. Then let's go stop traffic. But what moved David most were the little moments. The moments when he realized he was becoming himself again. Like when he offered to fix the wobbly kitchen drawer, and actually followed through. Like when he laughed so hard during one of their evening walks that he had to stop and lean on a lamppost to breathe. Like when he saw a kid biking past and thought, I want to live long enough to teach my own someday. Sarah noticed it all. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink to life across the lawn, David broke the silence. I didn't think I'd ever come back from that place I was in, he said. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. You didn't come back alone. He looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You saved me. She shook her head. No, I just reminded you who you were. They sat in comfortable silence for a while until David whispered, I want to do something. Something bigger. Sarah raised her head, curious. Like what? I want to help other guys like me. The ones who stopped believing they were worth saving. That night, he pulled out his old laptop, the one layered in dust and old regrets, and stayed up drafting something he hadn't thought about in years, a community wellness project. He called it the Second Wind Initiative, a support group and fitness space for men in their 30s-50s battling lifestyle-induced health issues and the depression that often followed. He pitched the idea to a local nonprofit. They listened. They approved seed funding. Within 6 months, David was running workshops twice a week out of the rec center downtown, the same place where he and Sarah had first met. The men came slowly at first. A few out of curiosity. Then a few more after seeing the before and after photos David shared, not of his body, but of his eyes, his tired, hopeless eyes next to ones that sparkled with purpose. He told his story honestly. He talked about the weight, not just the physical pounds, but the emotional heaviness. He spoke of shame, of fear, of watching the woman he loved carry a burden he couldn't name. But most of all, he spoke about Sarah. I didn't need a lecture, he'd say to the group, I needed a lighthouse. And that's what she was. Some of the men brought their wives the next week. Others came just to listen, not yet ready to change, but curious that someone had. The ripple reached even further. David was asked to speak at a local health fair. Then a church group. Then a men's mental health panel at the hospital where Sarah worked. She sat in the front row, her hands clasped tight, her eyes full of tears. He pointed her out during his talk. That's my wife. She saw me drowning, and instead of yelling at me to swim, she jumped in and swam beside me. People stood, applauded. Afterward, an older man approached Sarah in the hallway. You have no idea what you did for my son, he said, voice cracking. He wouldn't listen to anyone. But he listened to your husband. And now, he's fighting again. Sarah smiled, her heart full. She had only ever wanted to save David. But kindness, like love, has a way of rippling outward, touching lives we never even see. It was their 10th wedding anniversary. Sarah had asked for something simple, let's just spend the day together. No distractions. Just us. David agreed, though secretly he had something more in mind. That morning, he made her breakfast, avocado toast with poached eggs, strawberries, and a green smoothie she herself might have made him months ago. He even added a tiny note under her plate. Greater than, day 300. You still save me. Sarah laughed softly, touched, as she read it. You remembered the days. I never stopped counting, David said. Every one of them mattered. They spent the morning walking along the river, hand in hand like they used to before life got heavy. They talked about everything and nothing. Their childhoods. Their favorite songs. The things they'd do with kids someday, if life was kind enough to grant them that chapter. At lunch, David led her into a cozy community cafe, bright walls, wooden booths, soft music. She blinked in surprise. Isn't this the old space behind the rec center? David smiled. We renovated it. A few of the guys from Second Wind pitched in. I thought it could be more than just a support group. It could be a place for everyone, families, people starting over, people learning how to care again. He handed her a menu. At the bottom, in neat print, was a message. Greater than, dedicated to those who love us into becoming our best selves. Tears welled in her eyes. And then David did something he hadn't done in years. Not since the days before health scares, before broken routines and silent dinners. He knelt beside her. The cafe grew quiet. A few patrons noticed. One waitress gasped and covered her mouth. David pulled out a small velvet box, not with a new ring, but with her original one, newly polished. I know we're already married, he said, voice steady, but I want to ask again. Not because I have to, but because I get to. Will you keep choosing me? Even now that I can finally choose myself. Sarah laughed through her tears. Of course I will. They kissed. The room broke into soft applause. That night, as they curled together on the couch, where the story had once begun, dark and heavy, David glanced at the wall. Their notes board was still there. Now cluttered with nearly a year's worth of messages, stickers, and scribbled love. He reached for a new one. Wrote carefully. Pinned it in the center. Greater than, day 300. A healthier body. A fuller heart. A forever love. Sarah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat that had once frightened her with its strain. Now it pulsed strong beneath her ear, steady and sure. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I'm proud of us, he replied. The rain began to fall outside again, soft, rhythmic, like the ticking of time. But inside their little home, it was warm. A place where kindness had taken root. Where love had not only endured, but transformed. And where two broken people had learned that healing doesn't always come in big moments. Sometimes, it starts with a smoothie. And the hand that holds yours while you drink it.